Hello, I am here on this Sunday afternoon with Stacey Donaldson, all the way in Longmont, Colorado. And we're continuing our conversation between two acupuncturists and getting to know each other and introducing ourselves to everyone else. So welcome, Stacey.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicky.
So, Stacey,
Yeah.
everyone has an interesting story about how they got into acupuncture in the first place. So, what's your story?
Mine is I will try and keep it as short and sweet as possible. I grew up on a ranch out in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming. The nearest civilization in any direction was 35 miles away. And after I graduated from college, I ended up in New York City.
Mm.
And while there, I kept getting chronic sinus infections. And so it was my first introduction to holistic medicine. Was my doctor at the time sent me to a naturopath and was like, you're too young to have sinus surgery, you're too young to have all of these sinus issues, go to this naturopath. And she had done school at Bastyr, and so she did a combination of Chinese herbs and Western herbal medicine. And during one of our treatments, and at the time I was a computer programmer. I worked for WeightWatchers.com as their startup. And during one of the times we were questioning, she said to me, the way you think and the way you ask questions, you would make an excellent acupuncturist. And I looked at her and I was like, really? And she was like, yes, you should go to acupuncture school. Because I was very interested in herbs, and I used to make potions for my team members to drink. I would learn from her, and then I would make herbal stuff for my team members to drink. And I basically told her that acupuncture was placebo and that it was only in your head. And I thanked her, but said thanks, but no thanks. And I am deathly afraid of needles. And so there was no way that I was going to go anywhere near needles. And we left it at that. And about 2 years later, I had moved back to Wyoming, and I was training horses. And I was in a horse accident, and one of the horses I was training ended up getting acupuncture from a veterinarian. And so that was actually the first time I ever saw acupuncture in motion. And the reaction of the horse was so profound. And like during the treatment and then post-treatment, that it made me very curious. And so I was like, and horses, there's no such thing as placebo with horses. As with animals. And so I was like, okay, so this can't be all in the horse's head. Like, it doesn't work that way. And literally a week later, I was in a really bad horse accident, and I broke my left knee in a really freak kind of way. Like it's called an avulsion fracture. And I pulled the top of my tibia, the tibia tuberosity up. Like I peeled it like a pop can. And I was almost 30 at the time, and that doesn't happen to people my age. And the doctor had all this super convoluted way of wanting to heal me. And I was like, no. And so I ended up in an acupuncturist's table because they put me in a straight cast, and when they went to remove the straight cast, I couldn't bend my knee. And he gave me 24 hours to be able to bend my knee, or they were going to go in and do emergency surgery. And I had no insurance at the time. So I was like, I can't afford emergency surgery. And so I ended up on an acupuncturist table, and she stuck 3 needles in my right elbow, and it was my left knee, and my knee bent. And it was the first time I felt chi. I felt everything that we feel. And I was like, oh, I need to know how this works. And so that's how I got to acupuncture school.
Wow, so in your case, the horse actually led you to the water and made you drink. So you mentioned chi there. So for people who don't understand or haven't tried acupuncture, Can you explain what you meant by that?
So my favorite analogy for that is goes back to the Matrix actually. I'm dating myself with the movies. But the fact that our body runs on several different ways, and one of the things we run on is electricity, and we make our own. And chi is this all-encompassing word and wonderful very complicated kind of concept that encompasses all of that. It encompasses oxygen, and encompasses blood, and it encompasses how the nerves fire within the body. And the chi sensation that we learn to try and get with our needles is kind of like this dull, achy, heavy bone, kind of funky feeling. That's how I describe it. And the first time you feel it, you realize that we are full of electricity. It's kind of fun because you can feel it moving. And it's just the needles being in contact with certain cellular structures, namely fibroblasts and some fascia. And it creates that sensation. And that's actually, it has a whole bunch of pathology that goes along with it that helps heal the body. But yeah, so that's my kind of complicated way of describing chi.
I love that. I also like to equate it with electricity. And the way I explain it to my patients is the human body, we do run on electricity. Like we talk about electrolytes, for example, all these chemicals in our bodies and our cells, they all combine to create electrical charges. So I say our bodies are basically like big circuit boards, and the acupuncturist knows where the switches are that turn things on or off as needed. Um, so for you, what kind of specialties do you practice in your clinic?
So I mainly focus on women's health. Um, I think this often happens as well. You had a similar journey. Like when I went to acupuncture school, I was going to do only sports acupuncture because that's what I had to recover from my knee injury. And I was not interested in herbs. I started at Pacific College in New York City, and they had just introduced the acupuncture only program. And so you could choose acupuncture only or acupuncture and herbs. And at first I was going to be just acupuncture and just sports medicine. And then like in the initial interview, the dean at the time was like, well, if you really want to understand the full concept of Chinese medicine, you need to know herbs. Well, I wanted to know it all. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll sign up for herbs. And then after the first year in school, I realized I fell in love with herbs. Like herbs really became more my jam than the acupuncture.
Mhm.
I love acupuncture, but I really love herbal medicine, like really. And I was in a cohort that we were kind of like hardcore herb geeks. We just all really loved herbs. And so we would, it was fun because it was like a group of fellow colleagues and we were all into herbs. And then about a second or third year, I think it was there, I actually had a miscarriage.
Oh,
That's what led me into women's health, and specifically pregnancy support and recovering from miscarriage and all of that. And so it's kind of like my own journey is what influenced me into my medicine. And so by the time I graduated, I was specializing. I'd had my son then later. And so by the time I graduated, I was specializing in pediatrics and fertility and women's health and emotional support. And then after I had my son, at the time we were in New York, I couldn't get a treatment, like because I was either in school or he was with me.
wow.
And he was a newborn and an infant. And at the time, everywhere I would go, he would have to come with me. And nobody in New York at that time that I knew would treat me with my infant. And so that really, it took me almost 2 years to get an acupuncture treatment that wasn't like in school. And that really influenced when I opened my clinic. So my clinic up until now has specialized definitely in like all aspects of women's health, but especially in moms and supporting moms. And our clinic is designed and is very friendly. Like moms bring their kids with them. If they have infants, they bring them with them. I figured out a way to where, you know, the youngest infant we've had in the clinic has been 4 weeks. And, you know, when they're that tiny, they sleep through everything, and, you know, I can lay them on mom and I can do distal needling. And when I started the clinic, that was my big focus, was in supporting moms, because I learned firsthand how American culture just it leaves, most of the time, it leaves moms out to dry. Like, we're all about getting pregnant and up until the point when the baby arrives. And then once the baby arrives, mom's just kind of like left on her own. And she's expected to bounce back and everything be wonderful after 6 weeks. And there's usually very little support. And so that's what we've been specializing in since I opened.
That's really unique and exciting to hear. I was actually going to ask you what your special sauce is, because every acupuncturist puts their own DNA into their practice, and you just described it. And also, it's a beautiful story. I love how whatever you believe, whether it's the universe or serendipity, that gently nudges you in one direction or another. So that's really wonderful. For the people out there, in terms of women's health, what are some of the conditions that maybe people don't realize that acupuncture can actually help them with?
My favorite one is the menstrual cycle. American women are taught that having a painful, like chaotic, um, incredibly uncomfortable menstrual cycle is normal. And that's like, just suck it up and live with it. And um, I think all of us, when we were in our second year OBGYN class, and the teacher was like, that's not healthy and that's not actually how it's supposed to be, we were all like, what? Like, you know, because it is. I mean, our culture, our advertisements, everything you see around the menstrual cycle is that it's this big painful pain in the butt thing that you just have to put up with, and it's ugh. And usually women come in to me for insomnia or for stress and anxiety. And then during the course of us talking, we usually always, because the menstrual cycle is so key to women's health, and then they have an imbalanced menstrual cycle. And I'm like, you know, it's not supposed to be that way. It's, a healthy menstrual cycle is one that you only know it's coming because you track it on your calendar, and you might be fatigued a little bit before the day of, but that's it. And there's no PMS and there's no cramping, and you bleed for 3 or 4 days and that's it. Everybody's like, what? Like, no, but it's funny because usually people don't believe me. They don't believe that that can actually happen. And that's one of the key things that I tell my patients. Like, that's one of the things that once your cycle gets to be like that, I know that you are healthy. And for those of us watching, I'm in my office, but my daughter is with me, so sometimes she might interject. So I apologize.
Well, that just kind of proves your family-friendly motto, because you bring your own family to work. So yeah, I totally agree with you. What I hear more than anything is, people might not even come to me for menstrual issues, but in the course of our initial interview, I always bring it up. And what I hear often is, yeah, I get really bad PMS, but so did my mom. Like, period. Like, oh, those are just the cards I was dealt. And so, for me. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. And they're like, what?
Yeah, the flip side of that is I talk a lot about, like, a healthy period, like I said, is one that you don't know is coming. There's no PMS. There's, no cramping. It's not that big of a deal. And it's the same thing with menopause. That
Mhm.
you're starting to have menopausal symptoms. Our culture has made menopause into this thing where you're supposed to have night sweats and low libido and um, all the different stuff that we all talk about and the hot flashes. And I was like, not necessarily. You don't have to have that either. And how those two things bookend really show how healthy your body is, and that those symptoms are actually a sign of imbalance. And it doesn't have to be that way. And it's fun because even my OBGYN colleagues, we have lots of conversations because Western medicine really does not have that perspective. Like, those are classic symptoms, they are normal, and you just have to live with them. And then when they come to me and I'm like, you don't have to live with them. We can do that. We can do something about that. And then they come back. Often, my close OBGYN colleagues have gotten used, they now refer those to me. But often it's like, oh, it's just a one-off, or oh, that just like, oh, well, that's interesting. Like, it's not a normal thing, but it is. It's normal not to have those symptoms. We just haven't figured that out in this culture.
Yeah, I think that's very telling. In Western culture, often the abnormal is considered normal. Um, but I'm sure a lot of people who don't know, like, they would say, "Oh, that's really interesting, Stacey, but exactly how are these needles or herbs or whatever? How exactly is that going to help?"
Um, so part of it is the needles. It's a whole body rebalancing, and it's helping your body wants to get to a state of health. And I often say that I'm not the one that's making the changes. I'm just the one that's helping the body to realize the changes that it needs. And there's a lot of patient education that I do. So, like you said, like, our culture tends to make the abnormal normal. So, a lot of these symptoms are because of the stress that women are under. And it's kind of almost become cliche now about, self-care and taking care of yourself and how much stress women are under. And I find that to be sad and frustrating because the truth of the matter is that they are under a lot of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies handle stress differently than men do. And our hormones and our endocrine system are one of the first signs that pop up that things are not going normal. And the herbs and the needles help the body find that balance and help kind of, I talk about in my practice how the needles help get you into a deep state of parasympathetic, which allows your body to be able to rebalance the hormones and redo all of that. And then the herbs and the diet help your body to be able to heal and replenish all of that. And so, that's how they work together. And then you learn how to live your life differently, and also how to recognize. I find a lot of us live with a lot of stressors that we think are normal, and we've learned to ignore the signs that our bodies are telling us. And so once you become aware of those signs again, you don't get as out of balance as you were.
So I think that one of the reasons why acupuncture is becoming more part of the general dialogue is a lot of people find us because they're trying to get pregnant, for example. And do you think that there's more of a prevalence of what we call idiopathic infertility, as in, like, there's maybe you go to their doctor and they're like, we can't say that there's any one reason why you can't get pregnant, but do you feel like that's happening more and more, and if so, why would that be?
This is a conversation that fertility acupuncturists talk a lot about, because I mean, I have two differing opinions on it. One, I think maybe it might be on the rise, but I also think too, fertility acupuncturists, our population is the population that has exhausted every other possibility and has been told that there's no answer. And so I think our viewpoint is a little skewed. Like that's who I work with. You know, I don't work with primarily usually patients that are getting pregnant easily. That's not part of our culture. So I think sometimes we think it's on the rise because that's all we're treating. But the reason it's all we're treating is because other people are getting helped in other avenues, and acupuncture is usually the medicine of last resort. But I do feel, and I think it's going to be interesting during all of these stay-at-home and this quarantine and this forced slowness, because on one hand, we're being forced to stay home and to live at a much slower pace, which I think the pace of life that Americans view as normal before all this started, is incredibly unhealthy. And I think that creates fertility challenges, definitely creates long-term, aging diseases, things that Americans think are normal, like obesity and type 2 diabetes and all the autoimmune stuff that pops up. I think our lifestyle and the level of stress that we thought was normal contributes to all of that. I'm going to be very curious to see what happens after and during this time period, because we've slowed down the pace of life, but we've also ratcheted up a different kind of stress, this fear of the virus, this fear of being out and around and out with people. We've kind of like swapped one extreme stress for another extreme stress. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be curious to see what the long-term effects of that on us are.
Right. Well, I can't let you go without bringing up these wonderful products that you label under your Good Life Botanical label, and they are hemp products, yes, mm-hmm. Topicals, and that's how you first came on my radar. Is I just kept hearing about these wonderful products, and I don't even think they were even part of my vernacular at that point. It was before everyone and their uncle started carrying them. And so can you tell us a little bit about how that started in the first place? Like, how did you become one of the first players?
Just because of where I live. I'm in Colorado, and we were one of the earlier states. We legalized marijuana in 2012, medically and recreationally. And so my patients were self-medicating with it. Mm-hmm. And again, like I said, my primary love of this in Chinese medicine is herbs. And so almost all of my patients are on some sort of herbal formula. And what started happening is that patients were coming in, and I would give them a standard formula, and one that, hadn't modified. It was something that I've used thousands of times. And they would come in and they would tell me that they were having these reactions that were very much like what an overdosing reaction would be. And for the general public, overdosing in Chinese medicine herbs usually means that you are sent to the toilet a lot with GI upset. So it's not like, you have heart palpitations or you have rashes or anything like that. It just tends to make your bowels very, very unpleasant when you are taking too much. And it kind of stumped me for a while because I couldn't figure out why, because the formula was right. And I've done it a lot with these type of people, like why were they having this reaction? And then after a while, during like investigating and questioning, it would come up that they were using either CBD or marijuana as part of like to help them sleep, or just, using it throughout their day. And so that started me down a rabbit hole of researching cannabis and how cannabis works in the body, and just really educating myself as much on the cannabis plant as possible. And one of the theories I started experimenting with was I kept people on the herbs, but I started reducing how much I dosed them.
Okay.
And so if a standard dose of an herbal formula was like 9 grams per day, what I found was that once I got them down to about 3 grams per day, the formula would act as I was expecting it to act, and they would have the results that I was expecting them to have while they were still using their cannabis. And so that led me to the theory that something about the cannabis plant potentiates the action of other herbs. And fast forward, I've always made topicals. My dad, who's a rancher and a farmer in Wyoming, asked me to take one of the topicals that I had made and to make it stronger. And, oftentimes Americans think that if we make something stronger, we just add more of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how Chinese herbs work. And so I was kind of stumped because I was like, how do I make this like work faster and last longer? Because I can't add more of what was already in there. Like, that's not going to be how this works. And so then I took my theory of CBD and added hemp to it, because getting into the marijuana product industry is a whole other game. And I did a lot of research legally into which area I wanted to go into. And so we did hemp, and I sent it to him, and it worked. And of course, it was just, at that point, an experiment of one. And he's highly skeptical. He's not the easiest person in the world to try stuff on, which is great, because if it works, it really works. And so when I did it in 2014, I just started, once he said, yes, it works, I then started giving it to all my patients and having them, with full disclosure, like, I'm trying this, I need feedback, how does this work? And about 85 to 90% of them, it works as you have experienced. It works really fast, and it works for longer than just regular herbal topicals. And so that's how we started the business.
That's really cool. So what kind of conditions are you prescribing them for?
So this is fun. I actually get to do a little Facebook Live on this, because I just went through a marketing class on how we talk about this. So I have to be very careful how we say this, and it's a whole different way of speaking. So my products help maintain the physical body in its best way. So person to person, and not like prescribing, they help with pain. They help with mobility. They help with bruising. Legally, we can't say any of that. It's really funny. So legally, the way we say it is that they help the body maintain the sense of health and balance that it ideally enjoys.
Okay. So we just have a little bit of time left. So let's just bring this back to why we're even here. Is we started these dialogues because a lot of us, our clinics are closed. So we are reaching out and continuing, we all do a lot of education in our business. So this is just a way to keep people educated about who we are, what we do. So in this time of COVID-19, what is your best advice for how to get through it? What are you telling your patients? And what's your recommendation?
I think at this point, because everything is changing so much daily, it's really calling into that Zen practice of being here and now, and trying to have as little attachment to the future and to the past as possible. So really focusing on the little moments every day that are just wonderful. Like, and I might get a little emotional, sorry. We just took, we have a dog, Gracie, and we just took the kids and her on a really long walk this morning. And watching her run and the kids bike was just like, I don't get to do that often. Sorry. And so, like, really focusing, having people focus on those things, because that's what you can control, and that's what um you can really focus on, is just like, and I think people are missing people. We were out gardening right before I came here, and I had a complete stranger stop at the prerequisite 6 feet away and chat with me for 20 minutes. And I was the first person she had talked to in 2 weeks that wasn't her roommate. And so I think to get through this, that's what we have to like really focus on. I mean, we have all these people that have, like you and other colleagues, that have lovely herbs and lovely knowledge to help us in the physical body. But I think, I mean, we're going on almost 6 weeks of being at home. And
Mhm.
by the time we get done, it'll be 8 weeks. And humans aren't supposed to be separated from each other like this. Like, humans need humans. And so, at home, focusing on the connections and the relationships and just the little beautiful moments. And it can also be incredibly hard. Like, yeah, it can be really incredibly hard. And so, like, in between the hard parts, really acknowledge the beautiful parts, because you're going to be moving in and out of hard and beautiful and hard and beautiful. And at the end of this, you want to remember as much of the beautiful as you can and let the hard stuff just become a memory.
Right. So that continues your theme of balance, which you've expressed in so many different aspects. Everything from your clinic to your own life to how you treat people, and how we're going to get through this. So, any last thoughts?
Thank you. This was lovely. It's been fun having these chats.
Yes, and I hope we can continue. And so once again, everyone, that was Stacey Donaldson from Longmont, Colorado. And it's been a pleasure, Stacey, once
Thank
again.
you. Thank you, Vicky.